Okay. What is coming is a worldwide reset of all the global fiat currency that's been pushed into the world. And it resets against gold.
Welcome to Rethinking a Dollar. Today I'm excited to have today's guest, Kevin Massengill, founder and CEO of Meraglim Holdings. Prior to founding Meraglim, he is a 20-year Army veteran and previously served as Raytheon's vice president and regional executive for the Middle East and Northern Africa. Today, Mr. Massengill sits down with us to share his thoughts on the economy, as well as predictive analytics technology. So, Mr. Massengill, welcome to Rethinking a Dollar.
Well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to sit down with me. Looking forward to finding out more of your work that you're doing with the analytical detail things and technology you've put together there. But before we actually get into that, I would like to start off Rethinking a Dollar interviews with some RTD questions. And the first question is, what comes to mind when Kevin Massengill hears the words Rethinking the Dollar?
Oh, that's a great question. So the dollar's at the end of a 45-year fiat currency experiment. The average fiat currencies lasted down through history about 14 years, I think it is. So this one's way past its sell-by date. And divorcing itself from gold back in 71 started a clock ticking. And we are at the end now of this global fiat currency experiment where nothing's anchored to real value. And everybody is moving to figure out how they divorce themselves from the dollar as a reserve currency. So everything you see happening, whether that's the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, development banks that they're doing, the Asia Development Bank, whether that's recreating a new SWIFT protocol between the BRICS so that they can move money apart from the New York controlled SWIFT system. All of those are kind of preliminary steps that have to be done so that they can get away from the dollar as a reserve currency. So rethinking the dollar is a really apt phrase for the time we live in right now.
Right, I do agree. Now, one of the things of Rethinking a Dollar is to really reach out to the millennial generation to basically give them an understanding of what money really is. And so in your opinion, with all the things happening globally, would you consider this one of the most important subject matters that, the younger generation can probably grab a hold of at this point?
I do. There's going to be two impediments to that. One's, and this is not just the millennial generation. I find everybody deals with this. There are two kind of normal impediments to thinking about these things. The first one is normalcy bias, right? It didn't happen yesterday. It's not happened in my young life. It's probably not going to happen now. I don't have to worry about it. The other bias or the other default position can be, even if you understand its problems, there's a sense of learned helplessness. A sense that these are just too big and complicated subjects for me. Who am I? What can I do? I really don't have any control or impact in this, and therefore there's just no point in even thinking about it, right? Those are the kind of two human reactions you get from a lot of people, and by doing shows like yours to audiences like yours, we're hoping we can disabuse them of that, give them some ways to think about these things, and give them some concrete steps they can take to help protect themselves. That's the whole point.
Right. Now, in describing that, you mentioned problems. And so if you were given a chance to, I guess, give a summation of what's happening globally with our economy and our monetary system, if you were in front of the podium, all eyes tuned into you, what would you tell the public viewing your show?
Okay, boy, that's a great question. So I'd start with basic economics because it gets lost in the language. Let's start with a gallon of milk. Everybody knows if we walked up and said, we think the poor need a break, we think there's better things we can do for them, we're going to make dairy farmers produce milk at $25 cents a gallon. We think that's a living cost of a commodity good that people need to live, right? People who don't know economics will cheer, yay, right? You care, that's nice. You and I buy votes by doing nonsense like that. Right. But what'll happen weeks later is there'll be no milk, right? There'll be no milk because nobody can manufacture, produce milk, deliver, ship it, and have it on the shelves for 25 cents a gallon. It just can't be done. So they'll just all go out of business, or they'll literally shift to some other thing, right? They won't go away. They'll just stop trying to produce milk. And then there'll be a crisis, and people will turn to the government that caused the crisis in the first place to fix it, right?
Right.
Everybody knows that's how this works with commodities. Now, flip that on its head. You have a city council in Seattle that decides, it's just not it's not appropriate that people who don't have a lot of income should try to live on income less than $15 an hour. We're going to arbitrarily demand that you pay them $15 an hour, whether they're worth it or not. And there you go. Now, weeks later, they're shocked to find the very people they were trying to help are now having less income. Their jobs were either gotten rid of or their hours were curtailed because their labor is worth what it is, just like a gallon of milk. Right. It's worth what it's worth. And all you do by arbitrarily setting a price signal above its actual market clearing rate, all you did was just make it a crime for anybody to hire somebody whose labor is not worth $15 an hour yet. That's all you've done. You just made it a crime to hire them. Just like you made it a crime for the dairy farmer to sell a gallon of milk at anything above your arbitrary 25 cents a gallon. Okay. The reason I give you those two examples is because people lose sight of it when you transition to the big international picture. They get it instantly when you start talking about milk prices. They get it reluctantly when you start talking about minimum wage laws because it makes them uncomfortable. They feel like somehow they owe, somehow a minimum wage just feels right, even though it's, horrible economics.
All right.
But I do that to set the stage for the next conversation. So Ludwig von Mises once wrote, how is it that a bunch of businessmen who are all pre-selected for prescience, for their foresight and their business acumen, all get it wrong at the same time? How do all these malinvestments occur at the same time? What's the signal they're missing? And he figured it out, and I'll give you an example of it before I tell you what it is. Let's say we're in a small town, and a circus comes to town, and you and I own a restaurant. And we see the big uptake in patrons because we got both people coming from out of town to see the circus. You got circus performers themselves. And if we misunderstand the signals, if we don't understand what we're seeing, we can think this is permanent, and we can double. We can rent the other half of the building now that we've only got half. We can double our foot space. We can go buy twice as much kitchen equipment. Double size of kitchen. We can lay out. We double half the staff. Right? We double our staff, and we're making bank right for a while. Mm-hmm. We're killing it. Until the circus leaves town, right? And all of a sudden, what we've got is a malinvestment, right? The signals were wrong. Mm-hmm. And now there's really only two things to do. There's the economic solution, and then there's a political solution. The economic solution is you and I have to, with really clear eyes, look around, look at the situation and go, there's no way this little town can support the restaurant that we've built now. This is a malinvestment. And we have got to immediately sell half that kitchen equipment, lease the other half, sublease the other half of that space, and we got to let half the staff go. And we got to do it tomorrow, right? Because every day that goes by that we don't do that, it's a black hole for capital, right? This is never going to get on top of it. That's the economic solution. Mm-hmm. Here's the political solution. If you and I are also on the city council, right, we're all kicking this around, everybody's upset, the circus has left town, it just hit everybody, not just our restaurant. Somebody on that city council is going to But do you realize what percentage of our town is employed by that restaurant? They're too big to fail.
All right.
And they'll make the case that you should take money from the productive organizations, the productive businesses, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, literally take money from them. They could have spent on expanding. They've got real markets. They could have grown. They could have hired a couple more people. Now we're going to take money from them and continue to throw it at the politically connected restaurant. That's a malinvestment, right? So here's the question in the analogy, what's the circus? In the real world, what is the signal that everybody gets wrong? All right, before I tell you that, I'll give you one more example. If you and I are in this small town, and this kind of runs in cycles, people have decided they don't need to spend money as fast as it hits their hands. They're focused on the future. They want to bank. They save their money. Savings rates rise. There's more and more capital in our bank. So you and I have got a bank in addition to a restaurant, right? Mm-hmm. We're doing well. And we're finding more and more capital in our bank. What that causes is for interest rates to decline because I've got money available to lend. My competitor bank across, down the street, they've got more money to lend. So interest rates start to go down. The price, the rental of the money starts to go down because more money is available. That signal matters. It tells people something real. It tells them that people aren't looking to spend their money right now. I don't need to maximize current production. I've got time. Interest rates are coming down. Money's cheaper. I've got I can afford to do some long-term development projects, right? We wanted to expand the restaurant or do something else, or maybe turn that into a whole mall. Now is the time to borrow money and do that because interest rates are low. Those are signals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, when people aren't saving and they're spending money as fast as it hits their hands, that's a signal too. Our bank doesn't have as much savings to lend. Interest rates start to climb because there's just not that much money to go around. Neither do the other banks have money to lend. So interest rates start to climb. That's a signal. That tells us people are not saving money. They're interested in current spending. We need to maximize our current production to get in there and compete for those dollars they're spending right now. And because interest rates are high, we need to forego long-term capital plans. This is not the time. Now's the time to maximize current production. Okay. I tell you all that because the circus that came to town, the signal that everybody got wrong, are the interest rates that the Fed manipulates.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So when the Fed comes in and arbitrarily sets the price of money at some figure they think is appropriate for whatever reason they think, it's the exact same thing as that city council in Seattle manipulating labor rates. It's the exact same thing as the knucklehead community that decides to outlaw production of milk above 25 cents a gallon. It's the exact same manipulation, only it's worse. Now, it's a manipulation of the commodity that is the basis of every other price signal in the market. When you manipulate the currency itself, that is manipulating the scales against which everything else is weighed in the balance. And it's a global phenomenon because the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. Right? So that's the problem. That is the thing. It is a Federal Reserve Bank, which is just the head of a banking cartel, that is manipulating the price of currency under one really failed economic policies extraordinarily, and an arrogance, a hubris that just takes your breath away. This idea that these people are smart enough, they have enough data to manipulate the price of currency and help drive an economy in some direction they think it needs to go. All they are is a circus that's distorting the signals that all the businessmen in the that are affected by them are reacting to, and then all of a sudden find out those are malinvestments. We were misled. And it's not one person in 1,000 understands what's happening, including the knuckleheads running the Fed.
All right. Now, do you think that's by design? Because within, your explanation of how everything's tied together, basically to the interest rates, I came up with several different, whether the malinvestment with our infrastructure, malls closing, retail stores closing. You have entitlement spending, and there's 3 or 4 things that came to mind as a result of, basically near 0% interest rates. Now they're trying to tighten and increase the rates now, the Federal Reserve, as well as shrink their balance sheet. So, and I saw yesterday that they they approved the banks that are too big to fail as being stress test worthy and being able to be solvent as for coming next crisis. So, what do you foresee in the near future as far as a recession talk? I mean, everything is all out of whack now, and so how give me your thoughts on a recession coming anytime soon.
So that's a great question. Let me answer it in 2 ways. First of all, if you and I are running a ski resort and we get up in the morning and we look up at this horrible snowpack on this unstable mountainside, right? And we're looking at that going, when that thing comes loose, it's going to kill half our clients if it hits in the afternoon, right? We're going to have to go destabilize that. We're going to have to fire cannons at it, or do whatever it is, dynamite, whatever it is you got to do to get that thing to go ahead and kick loose. Asking when the recession is going to happen is roughly the equivalent of asking yourself, can I predict which snowflake will trigger the avalanche, right? And the answer is, of course, no, you can't. You're not God. But what you can do is look at the unstable snowpack, and know what's coming. That's the best analogy I can give you about time, right? The other thing I'd say is, this is the kind of thing you'd rather be a year early than a day late, right? So if you're on that ski slope when that thing lets go, you're out of options. You're done, right? And so getting yourself out of that harm's way and doing it a little bit early is vastly preferable to sticking around to seeing how this turns out. So that's the first answer to when.
So let me ask you.
The right answer is it doesn't matter.
Right.
You know it's coming.
So question is, what is coming? You're referring to, so what is coming in your opinion?
Okay. What is coming is a worldwide reset of all the global fiat currency that's been pushed into the world. And it resets against gold. And the reason why, so imagine that we all run our own countries. 45 years ago, we were all anchored to gold, albeit through the dollar. So we had our fixed exchange rate to the dollar. The dollar was fixed to gold at $35 an ounce. So the whole world was on a gold standard, just filtered through the US dollar. 71, we've been printing money like lunatics all through the all through the 60s. We wanted to have both our wars and our social programs, and we've hyperinflated the dollar. The foreigners who got these dollars know what we're doing, and they start saying, you know what? Give me my gold. Here's your dollars. Give me my $35 an ounce gold. We went from 22,000 tons of gold down to 8 really quickly, right? And rather than just stop the lunatic spending, stop this lunatic hyperinflation of the currency, we decided, oh no, we're gonna make some nonsense up about monetary speculators and whatever the nonsense was, and we're gonna sever the tie to gold. And what should have happened was a handful of countries who should have immediately went, oh shit, the world's going for some rocky shoals now. We steer away from this. They should have immediately pegged their own currency to gold. That's what they should have done. But nobody did. And it was the first time in history that happened. So for the first time in history, the entire world was adrift in monopoly money that had no value whatsoever, other than what we just arbitrarily said. And all of us had an economic incentive, a malincentive, to hyperinflate our currency, to grow it faster than the goods and productions that our people created, for two reasons. One, we pretended it was for our exporters, right? Even though for every dollar you help an exporter, you're hurting your importers. So I mean, that's kind of horseshit. But that's the public story they use. What they're really doing is they're hyperinflating the currency so that they can buy votes. They can promise stuff you couldn't pay for otherwise. They can do things they couldn't do otherwise, right? And if you're politically connected to the government, you get that new money first. So let's say we're all playing Monopoly. We got X amount of money in front of us, and we're getting ready to bid on the next product. But two people in the game get slipped an extra $1 million of Monopoly money. Not everybody gets it, just those two, right? Well, guess what happens in the next bidding round, right? The real estate just jumped up because there's new money on the board, but all of us just got screwed. It literally stole value from what was in front of us. Right. That's how this inflation game works. And so the government prints this money, but they give it to their favorite banks, their favorite defense contractors, their favorite entry points into society. They get the new money that's still got a high value, right? Because it's counterfeit. And by the time that trickles down through the economy, prices have all risen to account for the new monopoly money, and the people at the bottom just get screwed. That's where this wealth inequality comes from. That's why at the end of this 40-year process, you have this huge 1% advantage over everybody else. That's because they're the people that are getting the new counterfeit money first. Right. They get to spend that $1 million, into markets that you never even got to play in. All right.
Now, okay, I'm sorry. Now go ahead. So my question. So you're painting a picture of this very, not so pretty as far as a hyperinflation. You threw out some words there that are very, detailed as far as people losing a lot of purchasing power. And so when things go crazy and there is a reset, I mean, how paint a picture on the streets for those that are not aware and, in a position to hedge against all this craziness that's happening.
Yep. Let's talk about the three kind of categories of wealth. This is a really helpful way to think about the world. You have a primary, you have a secondary, and a tertiary. Primary and secondary wealth never goes away. No matter what the crash happens, they're all still there. So primary wealth is what God gives us. Think, cattle on 1,000 hills, fish in the sea, coal in the ground. These are things God put in place. Secondary wealth are what we do with that, the labor that we apply to it to create value. So we take, fish, we turn that into feedstocks. We take cattle, we turn that to beef. We take coal, we turn that into power generation. All of those, the ranches, the fisheries, the power generation plants, they're all still there the next morning after this crash hits. They don't go away. Your income producing real estate, your rental houses, all still there. Your private business is still there. It's the tertiary level assets that get wiped away. And what those are all the paper additives on a complex society. So it's the derivatives contracts, it's the futures contracts, it's the stock certificates, the pensions, the 401ks, all of that stuff gets wiped away because they're all tied to the value of the dollar that will be wiped away and reset. Your assets, so the point for your listeners is that the farther you can get away from tertiary assets and the closer you can get to primary and secondary types of wealth, the better you are to hunker down in this storm. So what will happen is at some point there'll be a crisis, probably start in China. Generally, these things are triggered in the emerging market. So the last great one, 1929, was the U.S. emerging out and starting to overtake the Great Britain, right? The one before that was Great Britain's famous South Sea bubble. They were coming out from under Holland. Before that, it was the Holland tulip bulb, right? So these things generally happen in the emerging market. So it'll start in Asia. It'll roil across Europe. We'll all still be asleep. We'll wake up one morning and there'll be a massive crisis. And literally banks will close. You'll see your fellow countrymen at ATM machines trying to get their, $100 a day or whatever it is the government permits them to have. That's what it'll look like. The way it'll end, because no government will trust any other government on earth at that point to be honest about what's the value of this paper they've flooded the world with, their particular currency, right? Nobody's going to take anybody's word for anything. So what'll happen? Every government on earth will have to divide the gold they say they have, and they'll have to announce it, divide that by the currency that they've printed into the world. That becomes the new value of their currency priced in gold. Now you've got a common reference point. So in the U.S., for example, my partner Jim Rickards thinks that number is around $10,000 an ounce. That's based on a 40% coverage with gold, which is what we did after World War I. I'm not sure. Let's take it at 10,000 though. I actually think it'll be closer to 50,000. But let's say it's 10,000. The way they'll do that is after a week or two of turbulence and emergency meetings and G20 meetings and blah, blah, blah. What they'll say is that we're going to peg to gold, but rather than admit to you that they're pegging it now $10,000 an ounce, what they're going to say is evil drug dealers and terrorists have got dollars and we got to get control of that because they're bad people. And so we're going to come out with a new dollar and you're going to have to turn in your old dollar 10 for 1. And the new dollar is solid and you can trust it because it'll be tied to gold at $1,000 an ounce. All of a sudden, and you'll get the corrupt media will cheer, yay, you're screwing over drug dealers and bad people, yay. And what'll be lost in the shuffle is that when you went to bed at night, your dollar was worth $1. And when you got up and they got done with this, your dollar's worth 10 cents. That's what's going to happen. That's how they hyperinflate away from the debt. It's how they default on all of their promises to their pensioners, to their savers. This is what a government does when it's $20 trillion in debt, right? They're not going to honor the debt. So what can your people do about it? What can your listeners do? Get out of dollars.
Get out of dollars.
Only keep as many dollars around as you need for the next month or two's expenses. Convert everything else to real assets. For example, buy a monster box of silver. That's 500 silver 1 ounce coins. It'll cost, $8,000, $9,000, these prices. Throw it in your safe and forget about it. In a dollar crisis, there'll be turbulence for a while. You'll still be able to transact in the marketplace. Everybody will understand what that's worth. You'll still be able to buy groceries and buy stuff. Just throw a box. You don't have to have a bunch of it. Just throw a box in your own safe. Don't put it in a bank deposit box at all. The banks will be locked down. You won't be able to have access to it. And then every time you get money, when you're building your savings, I would put it in either precious metals that you keep at the house, or if you have more money than you're comfortable keeping at home, open an account with either goldmoney.com or bullionvault.com. And they're not even called accounts. They're a holding.
Depositories.
Exactly. It's precious metal storage. Right. And have at least 20% of your assets in gold and silver bullion outside the reach of government. So not in a bank safety deposit box. If you live in the United States, I wouldn't keep it in the States. I'd keep it in Switzerland and Singapore as the two best locations, I think, right now.
Hmm.
And 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 then you can sleep at night. Then you've got nothing to worry about because when this reset, think of it as insurance, right?
Right.
When this thing resets, you'll have options. You'll have funds to continue to live and actually do quite well. And and wealth is like energy. It never goes away, right? It
Right.
just changes forms. Well, wealth is the same way. Like I said, the real wealth, primary and secondary, never go away.
Hmm.
And the tertiary assets get wiped out and they just get transferred to somebody else. In this case, they'll get transferred to the people who own precious metals,
Right.
right? So you can put yourself and your family on the right side of what Mike Maloney calls the greatest wealth transfer in human history, which is what's coming.
All right. I do agree. No, I'm sorry. So now, to move further, there's a lot of distractions happening right now. You've been an Army veteran, so you have your eyes and ears to the street as far as knowing how things are unfolding globally. Now, I want to touch on some of the tensions happening around the world with, our intervention in Syria and, us saying Russia interfered in elections and all these things that appear to be somewhat of a smokescreen. What are your thoughts on this? And is this tied into the shifting away from the dollar, in your opinion?
It absolutely is. In my opinion, there's a really good book your folks should read if they haven't by Strauss and Howe called The Fourth Turning.
Fourth turn.
And that book describes four generational archetypes that repeat down through history. So, and they have their kind of moment in the sun every 20 years, and then the next one kind of comes along. And as they move down through their life, they have different characteristics, but that pattern repeats down through time. This is a very old idea. The Etruscans had a name for it. The Romans called it a saculum. But when you read it, the reason I mention it is the bottom line is this. The generation that grows up in the shadow of the last great crisis, in our case, we call them boomers, right? These are the people born after World War II. That generation, when they come of age, meaning 60 to 80, 80 years later, 60 years later, as they kind of come down through their 20, then 40s and 60s, those people, that generation, always takes the world back into the next great crisis because they don't appreciate it. To them, World War II is a memory, just like the Kennedy assassination is a memory to me, or the Reagan's presidency is a memory to millennials, right? It's just a history book entry, right?
Right.
It's not quite real. I mean, they know it happened, but there's not a tangibleness to it the way there is the way they think about the Obama presidency. That was real. They saw it, right? It had meaning. Well, that phenomena, that it's called a winter phase if you like Kondratiev, the Soviet economist, or it's called the fourth turning if you're speaking in the language of Strauss and Howe, and it has certain characteristics, and they always happen every time, and it's not moon phases or woo woo. Think about how your grandparents or your great-grandparents got through the Great Depression, got through World War II, and how that colored the way they viewed the world. It colored how they did savings. It colored how they did investments. It colored how they wanted to pay off their house as fast as possible. Right? It had real impact.
Right.
Well, those impacts color how these generations react. The millennial generation is the civic generation. It's the same generation. It's the third generation. It's the generation that always winds up fighting the next great war. So the millennial generation not only will bear the brunt of this next war, it will be the generation from which all of our future presidents are drawn, by and large, right? So this is an interesting phenomenon. So I recommend the book. Highly recommend the book. What you'll see coming, and what you're seeing coming, is this great liquidation, the great rebalancing, all of these debts, all of these fiat currencies, all of this jockeying for position, for control, all of the tension, not just globally, you see it inside the country as well. You see what looks like an almost breakup of the country along factional lines that's all about resource allocation, right? And that same phenomena happens every time. So, will it evolve into a full-blown civil war inside the U.S.? Don't know. That may get shunted or blunted as we go to a full-blown war externally, right? Right now, you've got Pakistan and India at each other's throats. If that kicks off, Pakistan gets China to join it, maybe Iran. India gets Russia, probably the U.S., and we go into, the next Great World War III, or it could kick off between Saudi Arabia and Iran, right? The GCC and Iran. And again, you get Pakistan come in, you get Russia to come in on the side of Iran. I mean, any one of these could easily trigger into a great conflagration. And one of the reasons why is all the people that are alive today and really running things were born after the last Great War. They just don't have an appreciation for the horror that kind of overtakes the world after they expend all that time and resources and blood and think, what are we doing? And that's when it stops. But 4 generations later, 60, 70, 80 years later, it all starts again. So when I see this turbulence, I see it not just in the body politic in the United States, but you see it inside European countries. You see the internal tension that seems at a historic high. It is a historic high because it's this time in the cycle. And then you see enormous tension between countries, trading wars, currency wars that have been going on for 10 years, trade wars now that are breaking out. Well, that almost always leads to shooting wars, almost always. So again, back to what the millennials can do, what your listeners can do. The first thing you got to understand, you're not a 7-year-old. You're not sitting in the back seat of the car on a stormy night where you look out the window and you think, oh my God. And then you look over and you're like, okay, Dad knows what he's doing. He can get me home. And you just go to sleep in the back seat. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Every kid remembers that feeling, right? What you got to understand is there are no adults driving this car. You can't sit back and say, you know what, smarter people than me understand this. They speak, when they're talking, I don't even understand every third word they're saying. They got it. They understand what they're doing. You have to come to grips with the fact they don't. They really, truly don't. Right. I can give you an example. So let's say you and I go to a National Press Club. We're going to listen to some guy give a speech. Mm-hmm. And he gets up there. And he's got his short pants on and his Smokey the Bear hat. He's some kind of forest ranger. And he starts telling us his plan to fix Yosemite, right? He's going to dial up a little badgers. He's going to dial down some bears. He's going to make Yosemite better, more efficient, right? We'd start laughing, just like you just started smiling. Yeah. It's just silly. Yeah. This is a complex, dynamic ecosystem, right? You're not God. You don't have enough data. This is Hayek's fatal conceit on steroids, right? Yeah. You're an idiot. Okay. Now, get rid of that guy. Now picture Mario Draghi or Mark Carney or Janet Yellen or any of this cast of knuckleheads standing up at the National Press Club talking to you about how they're going to fix the economy. They're going to dial up a little inflation. They're going to dial down some unemployment. They're going to make it better. They're going to make it more efficient. You should have the exact same reaction as you would that fictitious forest ranger. Right. You should immediately understand the task they're setting out for themselves is so arrogant, so full of hubris, so insane. You should immediately know these people have no idea what they're doing. And all they're going to do is fix one thing and cause a whole cascade of problems on the other side that now they're going to spend their life stamping out that little fire and spending my tax dollars to do it. Markets are a gigantic auction. Just like the labor market in Seattle, just like the market for milk. It's a gigantic auction. And every day, you and every other market participant gets up and decides, do I spend money today? Yes or no? If I do, on what? Buy this, don't buy that. That's a little expensive now. I'll replace it with buy this instead. Mm-hmm. Every day, the whole world are making these decisions. And collectively, that emerges as a series of price signals. Right? All right. And it tells us what to study in school. It tells us what to buy. It tells us what businesses to start or not start. It tells us what businesses to close, right? Those signals matter. What you have are the world's bank cartels, central banks, manipulating the very price of the currency those signals are supposed to convey data in. And it causes a banquet of unintended consequences. Shopping malls all over the country that are now ghost malls. In China, you got 27 cities the size of New York, completely empty, right? Those are malinvestments caused by the circus that came to town and everybody misunderstood what they were seeing.
Whew. Now, as we draw towards the end, you did a good job of just laying out a complete foundation of what's happening and what's to come. Now, you're doing some great work over there with some predictive analytical technologies. Forgive me. So, give us a little insight into what you have going on there and what type of services you guys offer that could probably help some people, make it through all of this, stuff that's happening and coming.
No, absolutely. So, Jim Rickards, after 9/11, after the towers came down, the CIA asked Jim Rickards if he could help build the algorithms that would scan global financial market data to look for those events in the future. And the answer is yes, you can. As some of your listeners may know, there was a lot of shorting of airline stocks and defense stocks all of a sudden just before 9/11. Same thing happened in the UK ahead of the rail line attacks in 2007. For a host of political reasons I won't bother to go into, the CIA shut the program down. And Jim and I met in a conference. I was running the Middle East for a defense contractor at the time. He was a speaker. I'd read his books and just went and shook his hand. We got to know each other. And he mentioned this frustration in having the government close this thing down. And I said, well, Jim, let's think about it differently. What if, instead of looking for another government sponsor, what if we asked ourselves, what government agency would turn down a subscription if this were simply a financial data, predictive data analytics service, and we tucked up under Bloomberg or IBM or Thomson Reuters, right? Perfectly innocuous. And so what Jim and I did was we hired the world's finest data scientists, and what we're doing is completely different than the quant model. So you've heard about quants, you heard about high frequency trading, you've heard all the things that people are doing. I think less than 10% of the market now is traded by actual stock traders or evaluating stocks. It's all machines now. We're not doing any of that. Great math, great science, great data sets. We're not doing that. Here's what we're doing. We're taking subject matter expert narratives. So who's the smartest person on interest rates? Probably Jim Grant, right? Grant's Interest Rate Observer. We take a narrative from him. Here's what he thinks. Here's what he thinks are the connecting tissue. We extract from the narrative the connective tissue, the causal connections, and we weight them. That becomes a visual map. Think of bubbles with lines, everything else. That we then run our proprietary algorithm over it. That's made of Bayesian inference, behavioral psychology, complexity science, computing with words, textual inference, and historical perspective. So that sounds like a lot, but we've integrated all that into our own proprietary algorithm. Then you partner with IBM Watson, which we've done, and Watson looks across the entire world at all of these inputs. It reads something like 9 million articles and books a day. So think about those bubbles again. Each one of those are nodal impacts. So if, for example, Jim Grant says the Fed thinks they want to raise interest rates, every other quarter, or every other month until they get to 4%, unless, and here's the criteria they said unless. Well, that becomes an indication, a warning for us to look for. Did employment hit the targets? Did job creation hit the targets the Fed said they were looking for, et cetera? Well, you turn Watson loose to go do that analysis. Did it or didn't? So it's human intelligence that shapes the narrative, but it's machine intelligence that does the scanning globally of all the facts and data. That's what we've built. It's a predictive data analytics engine that's be very common if you and I were working in the intelligence shops at the Pentagon. We use Bayesian inference every day. Don't have enough data, so we got to make our best guess. And then what are the indications and warnings we'd look to see to confirm if we're right or tell us we're wrong? Bayesian inference, 200-year-old math. Right. If you and I are engineers at Los Alamos, we're using complexity science every day. We're modeling nuclear weapons. We can't detonate because we're not a little fat dictator in North Korea. So we're using complexity science every day. All Jim and I have done is taken that science, common in its current space, but now put it together and brought it to the financial universe. Because for whatever reason, governments, the banking cartels, and the financial institutions have just let all of this pass them by. They're still operating as though the world's like a thermostat. You hear it in their language, right? They think the economy is a machine or a thermostat. They're going to dial up a little inflation, dial down some unemployment. Wrong metaphor. The economy, like that Yosemite Park, is a complex adaptive system under the power law with feedback mechanisms. They're not standing there at a thermostat. They're more like a 10-year-old standing in front of the control panel of a nuclear reactor throwing dials they don't understand. They dial up a little 2% inflation, they're as likely to get 20% as 2. They don't know what they're doing. And so what Jim and I are doing is bringing a model that's actually accurate. So it's not that they're bad people. It's not that they're dumb. They're certainly not dumb. Yellen's way more intelligent than I am. But it doesn't matter how smart you are. If all of your models are predicated on the idea that the sun and the universe is revolving around the earth, kind of a pre-Copernican model, it doesn't matter how good your science is. It doesn't matter how good your math is. The answers are going to be wrong every time. It'd be like me saying, here's a pen. I'm going to drop it, right? Write down first what you think is going to happen. Well, everybody in the room is going to get it right, except the Fed. You guys will all write down, it's going to hit the floor. The moron's going to have to get out of his chair and get his pen.
Yeah.
The Fed, they'll look at the ceiling. Think it's going to float, right? It's their models are wrong.
Right.
And so all we've done is try to bring reality to financial markets. So for your listeners that might be accredited investors or just interested in the space, go to our website, meraglim.com, Meraglim, just like it sounds. Which is a cool story by itself, if we got just a second. Meraglim is the Hebrew proper name for the 12-man reconnaissance team Moses sends into the Promised Land. And I didn't even know they had a name. I heard the story all my life.
Yeah.
I've never heard they had a name. 10 come back famously scared, right? This is risk. 2 come back, Joshua and Caleb, famously going, man, there's a great opportunity here, right? We got to go now.
Yeah.
Right. Jim and I thought this was a great metaphor, a great analogy for what we're doing. Right.
Yeah.
We're going out and finding risks and opportunities and coming back for our clients. So if your folks are interested, if you've got accredited investors that are listening and want to participate with Jim and I, we're opening a data room in a couple of weeks. You can join our A-Series raise, and we're going to continue financing our development with IBM and do the integration with IBM Watson. So just follow the website, meraglim.com. Give us your email address there, and we'll keep you in the loop. And otherwise, if you're just interested in the space, you want to follow along, great articles there. Jim's a prolific writer, and we capture all of his stuff there. Right. And highly recommend you check it out.
Well, Kevin Massengill, I appreciate you sitting down with us and sharing your thoughts and giving us a great detailed, summation of what's going on and what we should expect. Definitely will keep in touch with you and continue to follow your work. So thanks again for sitting down with the audience at Rethinking a Dollar.
Michael, it's a real honor to join you today. Thanks for doing this.
All right.